My brother called me at 2 in the morning. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He simply said, "Mom died last night. I inherited everything, and you get nothing." Then he hung up. I sat there in the silence of my home office, the blue light of my computer monitor, illuminating a spreadsheet I had been analyzing for 3 hours. I did not cry. I did not scream. I looked at the cell on my screen labeled Aurora Holdings Debt Acquisition, and I smiled. My name is Douglas Richter. I am 66 years old, a retired forensic auditor, and I have spent my entire life tracking where money hides. My brother Bradley thought he had just won the lottery. He had no idea he had just signed a confession to a crime he did not even know he was committing. Before I tell you how I destroyed my brother's life with a single signature, let me know which city you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who share your blood. The phone rang exactly at 14 minutes past 2. I was awake. I am always awake at that hour. Insomnia is an occupational hazard when you spend 40 years hunting embezzlers and corporate thieves. I saw the name Bradley Richter on the caller ID. We had not spoken in 6 months, not since he accused me of trying to control our mother's finances. I picked up the receiver but said nothing. I let him speak first. "She is gone," Bradley said. His voice was not thick with grief. It was sharp, buzzing with adrenaline, like a gambler who just hit a hard 8 at the craps table. "Mom died last night. The nurse called me. I felt a cold pressure in my chest, a physical weight, but my mind remained clinical. I looked at the calendar. Tuesday. I had visited her on Sunday. She was weak but lucid. "I will come over," I said. My voice was steady. "Don't bother," Bradley snapped. "The body is already being moved to the funeral home." And Douglas, listen to me carefully. Do not come to the house, to the hostel. Do not think you can come here and start grabbing things. The will is clear. I saw the draft. I get the house. I get the stocks. I get everything. You are out. You are nothing. I won, Douglas. Do you hear me? I won. The line went dead. I placed the phone down on my mahogany desk. I took a sip of my lukewarm bourbon. Any other man might have thrown the glass against the wall. Any other son might have driven to the family estate and broken down the door. But I am not a man of impulse. I am a man of evidence. I turned back to my computer screen. The spreadsheet was complex, a web of loans, interest rates, and shell companies. I moved the cursor to the row titled Estate Liability and highlighted it in red. Bradley thought he was inheriting a $2.5 million mansion in the suburbs of Chicago. He was wrong. He was inheriting a financial black hole that would swallow him whole. "Congratulations, Bradley," I whispered to the empty room. "You finally got what you wanted." 3 days later, I stood in the parking lot of the Eternal Rest Funeral Home. It was a bitterly cold Chicago morning. The wind cut through my coat like a knife, but it was warmer than the reception awaiting me inside. The parking lot was full of luxury cars. Mercedes, BMWs, a few Bentleys. Bradley had always cared more about appearances than substance. He had invited every socialite, every real estate contact, and every drinking buddy he knew. He wanted an audience for his grief. I walked toward the entrance. I was wearing a black wool suit I had owned for 10 years. It was clean pressed and of high quality, but it was not flashy. As I reached the heavy oak doors, a hand shot out and blocked my path. It was Lydia, my sister-in-law. She was wearing a black dress that cost more than my first car, and her face was hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into a sneer. "Douglas," she said. Her voice was like grinding glass. "I see you decided to show up. We were hoping you would have the decency to stay away." "I am here to bury my mother, Lydia," I said calmly. "Move." She did not move. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her perfume was overpowering, a sickly sweet scent that tried to mask the smell of stale cigarettes. "Listen to me, old man," she hissed. "You are not sitting in the front. The front row is for family. Real family. People who actually cared about her. You can sit in the back near the door. We don't want the photographer to catch you in the frame. It would ruin the aesthetic. And honestly, Douglas, look at that suit. You look like a chauffeur. It is embarrassing. I looked at her. I looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. I knew exactly which credit card she had used to buy it. I knew the interest rate was 24% and that the card was maxed out. Row 10 is fine, I said. I prefer a wide view of the room. It helps to see who is truly grieving and who is just checking their watch. Lydia scoffed and turned on her heel, marching back inside to play the grieving daughter-in-law. I walked in and took my seat in the last row next to an umbrella stand. The room was suffocating with lilies. A gold casket sat at the front, polished to a mirror shine. It was grotesque. Mother hated gold. She was a woman of simple tastes, a librarian who loved oak wood and old paper. This funeral was not for her. It was a stage for Bradley. Bradley stood at the podium. He looked disheveled in a calculated way, his tie loosened, his hair mussed. He was gripping the sides of the podium as if he could barely stand under the weight of his sorrow. "Mom was my rock," Bradley choked out, wiping a non-existent tear. "She was the light of my life. Even when things were hard, I was there. I was always there." I held her hand until the very end. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. I watched the performance with dry eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my email. I had an alert from my private investigator sent 4 hours ago. It was a copy of a credit card receipt. Date: the night Mom died. Location: the Sapphire Club, Las Vegas. Amount: $3,000. Cardholder: Bradley Richter. He wasn't holding her hand. He was holding a martini glass 1,500 miles away. He had flown back first class the next morning when the nurse called him. I locked the screen and put the phone away. Let him talk. Let him build his tower of lies. The higher he builds it, the harder it will fall. After the service, the guests filtered out to the reception hall for champagne and caviar. I stayed in my seat. I watched Bradley shaking hands, accepting condolences, looking every bit the tragic heir. He spotted me in the back row. He excused himself from a group of investors and walked toward me. Lydia followed him like a shark trailing a fishing boat. "Well," Bradley said, standing over me. "You came. I am surprised you showed your face." I stood up. At 6'2", I still towered over him. Bradley had always been the smaller brother in stature and in character. "I came to pay my respects, Bradley." "That is what sons do. Don't talk to me about being a son," Bradley spat. "Where were you when she needed care? Where were you when the bills piled up?" "Oh, that's right. You were sitting in your condo counting your pennies. You abandoned us, Douglas. That is why she cut you out. It wasn't me. It was her. She saw who you really were." Lydia chimed in, crossing her arms. "We sacrificed everything for her, Douglas. We moved in. We took care of the house. We deserve this. You deserve exactly what you got." "Nothing." I looked at them both. I saw the greed vibrating under their skin. They were desperate. I knew their financials better than they did. They were drowning in debt. This inheritance was their life raft. "Is the lawyer here?" I asked. Bradley smirked. "Mr. Henderson is in the private office. He is waiting to read the will." "Come on, let's get this over with. I want to see the look on your face when it is official." We walked into the small office at the back of the funeral home. Mr. Henderson sat behind a desk. He was a sweating, nervous man who had barely passed the bar exam. He was Bradley's drinking buddy, not a serious estate attorney, but Mom had trusted him because Bradley trusted him. "Sit down," Henderson said, shuffling papers. I remained standing. "Read it," I said. Henderson cleared his throat. "I, Eleanor Richter, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. To my eldest son, Douglas Richter, I leave nothing. His coldness and lack of emotional support during my final years have caused me great pain. I hope he finds peace in his solitude. I felt a sharp sting, not from the loss of money, but from the manipulation. I knew Mom didn't write those words. Mom didn't speak like that. Bradley had dictated this. He had poisoned her mind against me when dementia started to set in. Henderson continued. To my beloved son Bradley Richter and his wife Lydia, who have been my constant caretakers, I leave my entire estate. This includes the family residence at 442 Oak Lane, all contents therein my investment portfolio, and all cash holdings. I appoint Bradley Richter as the sole executor of this estate. Bradley slammed his hand on the desk. Boom. Did you hear that, Douglas? Everything. The house, the stocks. It is all mine. Lydia was practically vibrating. 2.5 million, she whispered. We are rich, Bradley. We are finally rich. Henderson pushed a document toward me. This is a waiver, Douglas. It states that you accept the terms of the will and waive your right to contest it. If you sign this, the probate process moves faster. If you don't, we will drag you through court for years and drain every cent you have. Bradley leaned forward, his eyes manic. Sign it, Doug. Don't be stupid. You can't win. Mom hated you. Everyone knows it. Just sign it and walk away. I looked at the document. It was a standard waiver. But then I looked at the stack of papers in front of Bradley. The acceptance of inheritance. The assumption of assets. And crucially, the assumption of liabilities. I took a silver pen from my pocket. I uncapped it slowly. You are right, Bradley, I said, softy. I cannot win against Mom's wishes. If she wanted you to have the house, then you should have the house. I signed the waiver. My signature was firm, unwavering. Bradley snatched the paper away as if I might change my mind. He laughed, a loud barking sound. I can't believe it. He actually folded. I told you, Lydia, he has no spine. Bradley grabbed the pen from my hand and signed his acceptance papers. He signed furiously, page after page. He was signing for the house. He was signing for the bank accounts. He was signing for the future he thought he deserved. There, Bradley said, throwing the pen down. It is done. The house is mine. Get out, Douglas. Get out of my property. I don't want to see you again. I buttoned my coat. I looked at Bradley, then at Lydia, and finally at the nervous lawyer. Enjoy the house, Bradley, I said. It has a lot of history. I turned to the door. Wait, Lydia called out. She was smiling, a cruel, twisted smile. Aren't you going to cry? Aren't you going to beg us for a few dollars? Come on, Doug. Ask nicely. Maybe we will let you mow the lawn for minimum wage. I stopped. I turned back one last time. No, Lydia. I don't need your money. But I do have one piece of advice for you. What? She snapped. Check the mail in 30 days, I said. I walked out of the office, down the hallway, and out into the cold winter air. As I sat in my car, I watched them through the window. They were hugging, celebrating, high-fiving the lawyer. They were celebrating their victory. I pulled up the spreadsheet on my phone again. I looked at the line item for the Richter estate. Asset value, $2.5 million. Leon Holder Aurora Holdings, LLC. Total debt principal plus interest and penalties, $3.2 million. Status default. I am the sole owner of Aurora Holdings, LLC. I started the engine of my car. The heater kicked on, blasting warm air onto my frozen hands. My brother had just inherited a house that I effectively owned. He had inherited a debt he could never pay. And because he had just signed the acceptance of the estate, without doing a title search, without checking the liabilities, without listening to a forensic auditor, he was now personally responsible for the shortfall. He hadn't inherited a fortune. He had inherited his own destruction. I drove away from the funeral home, leaving my brother to his champagne and his ignorance. The clock was ticking. In exactly 30 days, the foreclosure notice would arrive, and I would be the one knocking on the door. My brother called to tell me I got nothing. He was wrong. I got the front row seat to the greatest show on earth, and the show was just beginning. They did not wait for the grass to grow over her grave. They did not even wait for the funeral flowers to wilt. Less than 24 hours after the reading of the will, the invasion of 442 Oak Lane began. I parked my black sedan 3 houses down, hidden beneath the shadow of a large elm tree that had lost all its leaves to the Chicago winter. I turned off the engine and cracked the window just an inch, letting the freezing air keep me alert. From the passenger seat, I picked up my leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. I was not there to reminisce. I was there to conduct an audit. A massive yellow dumpster had been dropped right in the middle of the driveway, scratching the pavement that my father had laid with his own hands 40 years ago. It sat there like an open wound, ugly and gaping. Next to it was a moving truck, but nothing was coming out of it. Instead, things were going in. My brother Bradley and his wife Lydia were not moving their furniture in yet. They were purging the house of its soul. The front door, solid oak with a brass knocker shaped like a lion, stood wide open. I watched as 2 hired laborers emerged carrying heavy boxes. They walked to the dumpster and dumped the contents without hesitation. I heard the sickening thud of heavy objects hitting metal. I raised my binoculars. Books. They were throwing away books. My mother was a librarian for 35 years. That house was not just a home. It was a sanctuary of literature. The library on the ground floor contained first editions of Dickens' leather-bound collections of poetry and historical encyclopedias that were out of print. I watched a hired hand toss a stack of books into the air. I saw the spine of a vintage copy of Jane Eyre flap open like a wounded bird before crashing into a pile of trash bags. I looked down at my notebook. I wrote the date and time. Then, in my neat cursive handwriting, I wrote Item 1, Vintage Library Collection. Approximate market value, $15,000. Status destroyed. Bradley did not know that inside the cover of that Jane Eyre was a personal inscription from a famous author my mother had met in the 70s. To him, it was just old paper that smelled of dust. To a collector, it was priceless. He was literally throwing money into the garbage because he lacked the intellect to understand what he was holding. Lydia stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing a white fur coat that looked ridiculous against the gray, slushy backdrop of the neighborhood. She held a glass of wine in one hand and was pointing aggressively with the other. She was directing the destruction like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. Faster, she screamed, her voice carrying sharply in the cold air. Get all that junk out of the living room. I want the space cleared by noon. The Italian sofa is arriving at 1, and I will not have it sitting next to those dusty old shelves. I watched Bradley emerge carrying a crate of vinyl records. My heart skipped a single beat, a rare involuntary reaction. That was my father's collection. Jazz, blues, original pressings of Miles Davis and John Coltrane. Dad used to sit in the den on Sunday evenings cleaning each record with a velvet cloth before playing it. He had taught me how to listen to the space between the notes. He had promised that collection to me. Bradley walked to the dumpster. He didn't just drop them. He flung them. I heard the distinct sharp crack of vinyl shattering against the metal side of the container. Snap, snap, snap. Each sound was a memory being executed. I watched Bradley laugh as he tossed a rare Blue Note album like a frisbee. He turned to Lydia, saying something that made her cackle. They were drunk on power. They were high on the idea of ownership. I did not get out of the car. I did not run over there and punch him in the face, although the urge pulsed in my knuckles. Intervention would solve nothing. It would only give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain. Instead, I uncapped my pen again. Item 2. Vintage Vinyl Record Collection. Approximate value $8,000. Sentimental value immeasurable. Status wanton destruction of estate assets. I documented it all. Every time they destroyed something, they were reducing the value of the collateral that secured the debt they had just inherited. They were cannibalizing their own future, and they were too stupid to realize it. Then came the heavy machinery. A small excavator rumbled around the side of the house, its tracks tearing up the dormant grass of the front lawn. I frowned. What were they doing? The backyard was accessible through the side gate. I watched the machine disappear toward the back of the property. I shifted my position, trying to get a better angle through the side yard fence. The engine of the excavator roared to life, followed by the sound of tearing earth. They were digging, but where? Then I realized. The rose garden. My mother had spent 20 years cultivating that garden. She had rare hybrids, prize-winning bushes that she wrapped in burlap every winter to protect them from the frost. It was her pride and joy. She used to spend hours out there talking to her flowers when she thought no one was listening. I saw the bucket of the excavator rise up above the fence line. It was filled with dark, rich soil and a tangle of thorny roots. The machine swung around and dumped the load into a pile of mud. They were ripping it out. All of it. Lydia appeared at the corner of the house holding a set of blueprints. She was shouting at the operator to dig deeper. I could read her lips through the binoculars. Infinity pool. She was saying she wanted an infinity pool in Chicago, in a neighborhood where the houses were built in the 1920s. An infinity pool that would cost $50,000 to install and another $5,000 a year to heat. It was vanity pure and simple. I wrote in my notebook item 3, mature landscaping and award-winning botanical garden. Status eradicated. Purpose excavation for unapproved luxury addition. I did the math in my head. The pool installation would require a permit. I knew for a fact they hadn't applied for one because the permit office takes 6 weeks to process, and Mom only died 3 days ago. They were building illegally. That was another strike, another fine. Another liability. I watched for 3 hours. I watched them drag my father's heavy oak desk, the one he wrote his dissertation on, out to the curb and leave it in the snow. I watched Lydia throw my mother's handmade quilts into a black plastic bag as if they were infected with a disease. I watched Bradley use my old baseball bat to smash a stained glass lamp that he thought looked tacky. I felt a coldness spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. It was the absolute confirmation that I was doing the right thing. There was no redemption for people like this. There was no misunderstanding. This was not grief processing. This was erasure. They were erasing my parents from the house so they could replace them with marble floors and modern art that meant nothing. At around 4 in the afternoon, a delivery truck arrived. 2 men carried in a massive flat-screen television. It was the size of a movie theater screen. Bradley directed them into the living room, the room where my mother used to read quietly by the fire. I closed my notebook. The ink was dry. I had 3 pages of evidence. I had photos taken with my telephoto lens. I had a time-stamped log of their destruction. Bradley walked out to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. He looked around the neighborhood, chest puffed out, surveying his kingdom. He looked right at my car. The tint on my windows was dark, but he stared for a moment, squinting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then he dismissed it. He probably thought it was just a neighbor. He grabbed the mail, mostly sympathy cards and utility bills, and walked back toward the house. He didn't know that the most important letter wasn't in that stack yet. It was sitting on my desk, waiting for the 30-day mark. I started my car. The engine purred to life, a low rumble that was lost in the noise of the excavator destroying the garden. I took one last look at the house. It looked like a victim of a violent crime. In a way, it was. "Go ahead, Bradley," I whispered as I shifted into drive. "Dig that hole in the backyard." Dig it deep. Make it big enough for a pool or big enough for a grave. Because financially speaking, you are already standing in it. I drove away slowly, adhering strictly to the speed limit. I was a man of the law after all, and the law was about to come down on 442 Oak Lane like a hammer. 2 nights after the destruction of the library, my phone rang again. It was 11:30 at night. I was sitting in my study reviewing the property tax history of the estate, building my case brick by brick. When I saw the name on the screen, my hand hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was not Bradley. It was Hannah. My niece is 20 years old. She is a bright girl studying architecture at the University of Chicago. She has my mother's eyes and, thankfully, none of her father's narcissism. We had always been close in a quiet way. I used to slip her books on structural engineering when her parents weren't looking. I answered the phone. "Hannah," I said softly. "Uncle Doug." Her voice was barely a whisper, and it was thick with tears. I could hear the jagged intake of breath that comes when someone is trying desperately not to sob aloud. "Uncle Doug, I don't know what to do. I didn't know who else to call." I closed the tax file on my desk. My focus narrowed entirely to the trembling voice on the other end of the line. "Take a breath, Hannah," I said. "Tell me exactly what happened." "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, her voice cracking. "Not physically, but Uncle Doug, I got an email from the bursar's office today. My tuition for the spring semester was due yesterday. It wasn't paid." I frowned. My mother had set up an education trust years ago. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to cover tuition. Bradley, as the executor of the estate, was now the trustee of that fund. "I called Dad." Hannah continued sniffing. "I thought it was just a mistake. I thought maybe he forgot to sign a check during the funeral chaos. But he laughed at me, Uncle Doug. He told me that the trust fund was part of the estate now, and that as the executor, he had the right to reallocate assets based on immediate family needs." Reallocate. That was a Bradley word. It was a sterile corporate term for theft. "He told me I have to take a gap year," Hannah sobbed. "He said that the house needs structural updates and that the liquidity is tied up in the renovation. He said my education is an expense they can't justify right now. He told me to get a job." I felt a cold fury rising in my throat, colder than the Chicago wind. He was stealing his own daughter's future to build a swimming pool. He was liquidating her education to buy Italian leather sofas. "It gets worse," Hannah whispered. She sounded terrified, as if someone might overhear her. "Tell me," I commanded. "They are having a housewarming party on Saturday. A gala, Mom calls it. They invited half the city. They hired a high-end catering company, but Mom fired 2 of the servers yesterday to save money." I stayed silent, letting her finish, though I already knew where this was going. The cruelty of my brother and his wife knew no bottom. "They told me I have to work the party," Hannah said. Her voice broke completely. "Mom gave me a uniform, a black skirt and a white shirt. She said if I want to live in this house, if I want them to even consider paying for my school next year, I have to earn my keep. She wants me to serve champagne to their friends, Uncle Doug. She wants me to walk around with a tray while they brag about the house that Grandma left them." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. This was not just greed. This was sadism. They wanted to humiliate her. They wanted to show her that she was beneath them, just a pawn in their new kingdom. They were treating their own flesh and blood like hired help. "Where are you now?" I asked. "I am in the guest room," she said. "They took my room, Uncle Doug." Mom turned my bedroom into a walk-in closet for her fur coats. She said I didn't need a view of the garden if I wasn't paying rent. I closed my eyes. I imagined Hannah, brilliant and kind, huddled in a small guest room, surrounded by the boxes of her life that her parents deemed worthless. "Listen to me, Hannah," I said, my voice low and steady. "I need you to listen very carefully. Do not fight them. Not yet. But I can't do it, she cried. I can't serve them. It is too humiliating. You can and you will, I said. I know it hurts. I know it feels like the end of the world. But I need you to be strong. I need you to put on that uniform. I need you to carry that tray. Uncle Doug, she asked, confused and hurt. You are on their side. Never, I said. I am on the side of justice. But justice takes time. Listen, Hannah, I cannot give you the money for tuition right now. If I write you a check, Bradley will see it. He will know I have resources. He will sue me, claiming I am trying to manipulate you against him. He will drag this out in court, and he will freeze the assets even longer. We have to be smarter than that. So what do I do? She asked. You become my eyes, I said. You work that party. You keep your head down. You say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. But while you are walking around with that tray, I want you to listen. I want you to listen to what Bradley tells his investors. I want you to see who is there. I want you to take pictures of every expensive thing they bought this week. Can you do that for me? There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard a small sniffle followed by a steady breath. You have a plan, don't you? She asked. I always have a plan, I replied. But I need a soldier on the inside. Can you be that soldier, Hannah? Can you endure one night of humiliation for a lifetime of freedom? I can do it, she whispered. Her voice was stronger now. Good, I said. And Hannah, when they treat you like a servant, remember this. They are spending money they do not have. They are standing on a trap door. And you and I, we are the ones holding the lever. She actually giggled. It was a watery, weak sound, but it was there. Okay, Uncle Doug. I will do it. One more thing, I added. Do not tell them we spoke. Delete this call from your history. To them, you are broken. To me, you are the most valuable asset in that house. I hung up the phone. I stared at the wall for a long time. My brother had crossed a line that night. Stealing from me was one thing. I was a grown man, I could take it. But stealing from his own child, cannibalizing her future, to feed his ego, I opened my laptop. I pulled up the foreclosure timeline. I had planned to give them the full 30 days. I wanted to let them sweat. But now, wow, I wanted blood. I drafted an email to my lawyer, Leonard Gold. Subject: acceleration of proceedings. Body: Leonard, prepare the filing. I want the foreclosure notice served exactly at 9:00 a.m. on the 31st day. No grace period. No negotiations. And Leonard, add a clause about the misappropriation of educational trust funds. We are going to nail him for fiduciary negligence as well. I hit send. Bradley wanted a party. Fine. I would let him have his party. I would let him fill that house with people. I would let him stand in the center of the room and toast to his own greatness. Because the higher he climbed, the more spectacular the fall would be. And Hannah. My brave, smart Hannah. She would be the one to hand him the bill. I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of the bourbon down the sink. I needed a clear head. The game had changed. It wasn't just business anymore. It was a rescue mission. Saturday night arrived with the subtlety of a car crash. From the live feed of the security camera across the street, which belonged to Mrs. Higgins, a neighbor who despised Bradley as much as I did, I watched my childhood home transform into a nightclub. The elegant colonial facade was bathed in garish purple uplighting. A red carpet had been rolled out over the cracked driveway, where the dumpster had sat just 2 days prior. Valets in red vests were parking Porsches and Maseratis on the lawn, crushing what was left of the grass. I sat in my study surrounded by screens. I wasn't there physically, but I was omnipresent. I had the guest list. I had the catering contract. I knew that Bradley had spent $40,000 on this single evening. He called it a housewarming. I called it a liquidity crisis. The guests arrived in waves. I recognized many of them. There was the city councilman who was currently under investigation for zoning fraud. There was the real estate developer who had filed for bankruptcy twice in the last decade. And there were the social climbers, the hangers-on who could smell new money like sharks smell blood in the water. They weren't there to celebrate Bradley. They were there to eat his shrimp, drink his liquor, and whisper about how long it would take for him to lose it all. Inside, I knew exactly what was happening. Hannah would be circulating with a silver tray, her eyes downcast, serving champagne to people who didn't know her name. Lydia would be standing by the fireplace wearing the diamond necklace she bought on credit, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. She would be telling everyone that they were planning to winter in Aspen and summer in the Hamptons. It was a performance, a desperate pantomime of wealth by two people who were technically insolvent. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Bradley. I picked it up. It was a selfie. The angle was low, capturing his flushed, sweaty face and the crowded room behind him. He was grinning his teeth, looking yellow under the artificial lights. In his hand, held up to the lens like a trophy, was a bottle of wine. I zoomed in on the label. My stomach tightened. Chateau Petrus, 1982. My father had bought that bottle the year he made partner at his firm. He had kept it in the cellar for 30 years. He used to tell me, "Douglas, we will open this when you retire. Or maybe when Hannah gets married. It is not wine, son. It is history." Bradley had popped the cork for a room full of strangers. Below the photo, a caption read, "To the victor go the spoils. Hope you're enjoying your TV dinner, big brother. This tastes like success." I stared at the image. I looked at the way he was holding the bottle by the neck like a cheap beer. He wasn't decanting it. He wasn't letting it breathe. He was swilling a $5,000 bottle of wine straight from the glass, likely pairing it with pigs in a blanket. The disrespect was absolute. He wasn't just consuming the asset. He was desecrating the memory attached to it. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to show me that he could burn down our history and warm his hands on the flames. I set the phone down and typed a reply. I didn't write a paragraph. I didn't rage. I didn't tell him that he was drinking my inheritance. I simply typed, "Enjoy it. But be careful. Vintage wine often has sediment at the bottom. It can be hard to swallow if you don't know what you're doing." I hit send. I watched the screen. A minute later, the 3 dots appeared, then stopped, then appeared again. He didn't reply. I leaned back in my chair. Sediment. It was a double meaning, of course. The dregs of the wine and the dregs of the reality he was ignoring. He was drinking the top notes of the estate, the cash, the initial credit lines, but soon he would reach the bottom of the bottle. And at the bottom lay the sediment, the liens, the unpaid taxes, the structural decay, and me. I pulled up the catering invoice on my computer screen. I saw that he had ordered 200 pounds of lobster tail. I saw the charge for the private security detail. I saw the rush fee for the ice sculpture. Every dollar he spent tonight was a dollar he wouldn't have when the Aurora Holdings notice landed on his doorstep. He was throwing a party on the deck of the Titanic, and he had just fired the captain. I took a sip of my water. It was crisp and clean. I didn't need vintage wine. I had patience. The party would end. The guests would drive away in their leased cars. The lights would go out. And in the silence that followed, the reality of the numbers would start to creep in like mold in the walls. "Let them dance," I whispered to the empty room. "They are dancing on a trapdoor." Monday morning in Chicago is a gray affair. The sky hangs low and heavy, pressing down on the skyscrapers like a wet wool blanket. While my brother Bradley was likely nursing a hangover from his extravagant party, sleeping in a bedroom that he believed he owned, I was walking into the office of Gold and Sterling on the 44th floor of the Willis Tower. Leonard Gold has been my personal attorney for 20 years. He is a man who wears 3-piece suits not because they are fashionable, but because he believes the law requires armor. He sat behind a desk that was wider than most cars, his silver hair perfectly combed, his eyes scanning a thick file folder. He did not look up when I entered. He simply gestured to the leather chair opposite him. "You are a cruel man, Douglas," Leonard said, turning a page. I sat down and crossed my legs. "I am a just man, Leonard. There is a difference." Leonard looked up, then peering over his spectacles. "Is there?" "I have been reviewing the timeline. You set this trap 3 years ago. You have been waiting for your mother to die so you could spring it. To an outsider that looks colder than the lake in January." I leaned forward. "Let us be clear, Leonard. I did not set a trap. I built a safety net. My brother is the one who turned it into a noose. If he had been a decent son, if he had simply walked away or tried to share the estate, he would never have triggered the clause." He pulled the lever himself. Leonard sighed and took a sip of his black coffee. "Walk me through it again, Douglas. Just so we are absolutely clear before I file these motions. If we go to court, the judge will want to know the history of Aurora Holdings." I nodded and looked out the window at the sprawling city below. My mind drifted back 3 years. It was a Tuesday. I had gone to visit my mother. She was in the early stages of dementia, then having good days and bad days. That day was a bad day. She was confused, agitated. I found her at the kitchen table weeping over a stack of mail. When I asked her what was wrong, she tried to hide the papers. She was proud, my mother. Even when her mind was failing, she didn't want her eldest son, the successful auditor, to know she was struggling. But I am trained to spot irregularities. I saw the envelope. It was from a predatory lending company, the kind that advertises on daytime television to vulnerable seniors. I took the letter from her shaking hands. It was a foreclosure notice. I remember the cold shock I felt. My father had paid off the mortgage on that house in 1998. It should have been free and clear. I asked her how this was possible. She wouldn't answer at first. She just kept saying that Bradley needed help. Bradley had a vision. Bradley was going to double the money. Slowly, the truth came out. 6 months prior, Bradley had convinced her to take out a reverse mortgage, a lump sum payment of $400,000. He told her he needed it for a guaranteed real estate investment that would pay for her care for the rest of her life. He told her it was just a formality. He took the money. The investment, of course, was a phantom. He lost it all in bad crypto trades and luxury vacations. And then he stopped paying the interest on the reverse mortgage. The contract was vicious. It had an acceleration clause. If payments were missed, the lender could demand the full amount plus penalties. They were coming for the house. I wanted to kill him. I stood in that kitchen watching my mother cry, and I wanted to drive to Bradley's apartment and tear him apart. But I knew what would happen. If I confronted him, he would run to Mom. He would cry. He would say I was bullying him. And Mom, in her fragile state, would defend him. She always defended him. If I paid off the debt directly, she would have been ashamed. She would have felt like a burden. Or worse, Bradley would have found out I had money to spare and would have started targeting me. So I did what I do best. I audited the situation. I looked for a structural solution. I went to the lender. I didn't go as Douglas Richter, the son. I went as the representative of a private equity firm I had incorporated in Delaware the day before, Aurora Holdings, LLC. I told the bank that my firm specialized in acquiring distressed assets. I offered to buy the debt from them for cash right there on the spot. The bank was happy to unload a toxic loan. They didn't care who bought it. They signed the papers. From that day on paper, my mother no longer owed the bank. She owed Aurora Holdings, and Aurora Holdings was me. I never sent her a bill. I never asked for a penny. I simply instructed the company to suspend collection activities indefinitely. The harassment letters stopped. My mother thought the problem had just magically gone away or that Bradley had fixed it. She died believing her house was safe. She died believing her youngest son was a genius who had solved the problem. I let her have that peace. That was my gift to her. But the debt didn't disappear, Leonard. It sat on the books of Aurora Holdings. And it grew. Leonard looked at the spreadsheet I had slid across the desk. He ran his finger down the column of numbers. The original principal was $400,000, Leonard read. But the contract Bradley had her sign. My God, Douglas. The interest rate is variable capped at 18%. And the default penalties, I nodded. Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, Leonard. Those who understand it earn it. Those who don't pay it. For 3 years, that debt has been compounding. Every month Bradley missed a payment, which was every single month a penalty was added to the principal. I did the math for him. Principal $400,000. Accrued interest over 3 years at 18%, approximately $280,000. Late fees and legal penalties as defined in the original contract. $50,000. Total lien on the property. $730,000. Leonard whistled low. That is a significant chunk of the equity. But the house is valued at $2.5 million. Bradley can still sell the house, pay off Aurora Holdings, and walk away with over $1 million. He still wins, Douglas. I smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. You are forgetting the second mortgage, Leonard. Leonard froze. Second mortgage. I pulled another document from my briefcase. 2 years ago, Bradley needed more money. He forged Mom's signature on a home equity line of credit. I caught him. I intercepted the application at the bank because I had monitoring alerts on the property title. Instead of reporting him to the police and sending my brother to prison while my mother was on her deathbed, I stepped in again. Aurora Holdings intervened. We offered to underwrite the line of credit. We gave him the rope, Leonard, and he took it. He maxed out the credit line. Another $500,000, plus interest. And here is the kill shot. I pointed to a clause in fine print on the bottom of page 10. The cross-default and consolidation clause. Leonard put on his reading glasses and leaned in close. He read the text silently, his lips moving slightly. Then he sat back, taking off his glasses. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and professional admiration. This clause states that if the primary lien holder is the same entity as the secondary lien holder, they have the right to consolidate the debts and reevaluate the collateral based on current market distress. It also states that in the event of the borrower's death, if the heir accepts the estate without settling the debt within 30 days, the lender claims immediate title to the property to satisfy the total obligation. Correct, I said. Bradley accepted the estate 3 days ago. He didn't do a title search. He didn't ask about debts. He just saw the dollar signs and signed his name. By signing that acceptance, he personally guaranteed the debt. And because he has already begun altering the property, destroying the garden, tearing down walls, he has triggered the waste of collateral provision. So Leonard, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket, we don't just want the money. We want the asset. Leonard shook his head slowly. The house is worth $2.5 million. The total debt is maybe $1.5 million. You are going to take the whole house. I am going to take the house to satisfy the debt, I replied. And then I am going to sue him for the damages he caused to the library and the garden. And then I am going to sue him for the legal fees. By the time I am done, Leonard, he won't just have zero. He will be negative. He will be working for the rest of his life to pay off the interest on his arrogance. Leonard closed the file. He placed his hand on top of it. You know, he said quietly, he is your brother. He ceased to be my brother when he stole our mother's retirement to buy a sports car, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He ceased to be my brother when he let her die alone while he was partying in Vegas. He is not family, Leonard. He is a bad investment. And I am closing the account. File the papers. Leonard nodded. I will have the foreclosure notice delivered. When day 30, I said, not a minute sooner. Let him finish his renovations. Let him install that pool. It will increase the property value for the next owner. I turned and walked to the door. Who is the next owner? Leonard asked. I paused with my hand on the brass handle. Aurora Holdings, I said, which means the library stays exactly where it belongs. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. The descent was smooth and fast. My ears popped. I checked my watch. It was noon. Bradley was probably just waking up, walking through the house he thought was his, perhaps yelling at Hannah to clean up the mess from the party. He was living in a mirage. A hologram of wealth projected by my silence. I stepped out into the lobby and out onto the bustling street. The cold air hit my face, bracing and sharp. Most people see debt as a burden. I see it as a tool. It is a lever, and if you have a long enough lever and a place to stand, you can move the world. Or in this case, you can move a parasite out of the host he has been feeding on for far too long. I hailed a taxi. I had one more stop to make. I needed to visit the cemetery. I had a promise to keep to my father. I had told him I would look after the family. And sometimes looking after the family means cutting out the rot so the rest can survive. Time is a strict accountant. It does not bargain. It does not offer extensions. It simply tallies the seconds until the debt is due. Exactly 30 days had passed since Bradley signed the acceptance of the estate. 30 days of demolition. 30 days of arrogance. 30 days of silence from me. I sat in my car, parked in my usual spot beneath the elm tree, watching the house through the lens of my camera. It was 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. The neighborhood was quiet save for the incessant grinding of a concrete saw in the backyard, where the pool was being forced into the frozen earth. Lydia was home. She was not alone. Through the large bay window of the living room, the window my mother used to decorate with snowflakes every December, I could see Lydia holding court. She was hosting what looked like a brunch for the neighborhood wives, a group of women who wore tennis skirts in winter and judged each other's husbands by the make of their watches. I zoomed in. Lydia was wearing a white cashmere sweater and holding a crystal flute of mimosa. She was gesturing expansively, pointing to the walls, likely explaining how she planned to tear down the original crown molding to install something more modern, more soulless. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who believed she had won the game of life. She had no idea that the game clock had just hit 0. A white mail truck turned the corner. It moved slowly, stopping at every other house, a harbinger of mundane news. Bills, catalogs, birthday cards. But for 442 Oak Lane, it carried a guillotine blade inside a flat cardboard envelope. I watched the mail carrier, a young man with headphones on, walk up the driveway. He bypassed the mailbox. He walked straight to the front door. He carried a scanner and a thick red and white envelope. Certified mail, restricted delivery, return receipt requested. He rang the doorbell. Inside the house, I saw Lydia pause. She looked annoyed. She said something to her guests, placed her drink on the mantelpiece, leaving a ring on the wood. I noted with a wince and walked to the door. She swung it open with an air of impatience. I could almost hear her voice through the glass. What is it? Can't you see I am entertaining? The mail carrier said nothing. He simply held out the scanner for a signature. Lydia snatched the stylus. She signed her name with a flourish, a signature she had probably practiced since she married my brother, convinced it would one day be famous. She handed the scanner back and took the envelope. She should have thrown it in the fire. It would have bought her a few more hours of ignorance. But Lydia was greedy. She saw a thick official envelope addressed to the estate of Eleanor Richter, and she thought it was a check. Maybe an insurance payout. Maybe a hidden dividend. She didn't close the door. She stood there in the open frame, the cold wind blowing into the house, and ripped the tab on the envelope. Her guests had gathered behind her curious. They were leaning in, hoping for a spectacle. They were about to get one. Lydia pulled out the document. It was 5 pages long, stapled at the top. The paper was heavy legal bond. The header was printed in bold black ink. Aurora Holdings LLC. Notice of default and immediate acceleration of debt. I knew exactly what the first paragraph said. I had drafted it myself. Pursuant to the terms of the mortgage note dated 3 years prior, and the consolidated home equity line of credit notice is hereby given that the borrower is in default. Due to the passing of the primary borrower and the failure of the heir to satisfy the outstanding balance within the statutory 30-day window, the lender hereby exercises its right to accelerate the debt. Lydia's eyes scanned the page. I saw her brow furrow. She flipped to the second page. That was where the math was, the breakdown of the debt. Principal balance $900,000. Accrued interest at 18% compounded monthly. A number that made grown men weep. Penalties for non-payment $50,000. Legal fees $25,000. Penalties for waste of collateral destruction of property value $100,000. And then the bottom line. The total amount due immediately. $3,245,600.00. I saw the color drain from Lydia's face. It didn't happen gradually. It happened all at once, as if someone had pulled a plug. Her skin went from a flushed pink to the color of old ash. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hand began to tremble. The paper shook violently, rattling like a dead leaf in a storm. One of the guests, a woman named Patricia, who I knew was the biggest gossip in the zip code, stepped forward. She put a hand on Lydia's shoulder and peered at the document. "Oh my God," I imagined Patricia saying. "Is that a foreclosure notice?" Lydia jerked away. She tried to hide the paper behind her back, but it was too late. The number was out there. The reality was out there. The house was worth $2.5 million on a perfect day. But right now, with the garden destroyed, the library gutted, and a mud pit in the backyard, it was worth maybe $2 million. They owed $1.2 million more than the house was worth. They were underwater. They were drowning in the middle of their own living room. Lydia turned and slammed the door, shutting out the world, but she couldn't shut out the truth. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the house landline. I knew they hadn't disconnected it yet because they were too lazy to switch providers. I watched through the window. Lydia was pacing back and forth. The guests were whispering, picking up their purses, inching toward the door. The party was over. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. The phone rang inside the house. I saw Lydia stop. She stared at the phone on the side table as if it were a bomb. She picked it up. "Hello," she screamed. Her voice was hysterical. "Who is this?" "Hello, Lydia," I said calmly. "Douglas," she gasped. "Douglas, you have to help us. There is a mistake. A horrible mistake. We just got a letter. It says we owe $3 million. It says they are going to take the house." I took a sip of my coffee. "There is no mistake, Lydia." "What do you mean?" "You know about this. Who is Aurora Holdings?" "We have to sue them. They are trying to scam us." "Aurora Holdings is a private equity firm," I said. "They specialize in buying bad debt from banks. They bought Mom's debt 3 years ago to stop the bank from taking the house then." "How do you know that?" she shrieked. "Because I signed the check, Lydia." Silence. Absolute frozen silence. "You," she whispered. "You are Aurora Holdings. I am the managing partner, yes. But that means you owe me $3 million, Lydia. And since I know you and Bradley don't have $3 million, I am going to take the house." "No. You can't. We live here." "We are renovating, I know," I said. I saw the hole in the backyard. By the way, that is an unauthorized excavation. It violates the mortgage terms. That is another 100,000 in penalties. Douglas, please, we are family. Family. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Family is the people who sit in the front row at the funeral, Lydia. Family is the people who don't throw away their father's records. You are not family. You are a squatter in my collateral. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, I continued. If you are not gone by tomorrow noon, the sheriff will remove you. And Lydia, don't try to take the furniture. That belongs to the estate, which now belongs to me. I hung up. Through the window, I saw Lydia drop the phone. She collapsed onto the sofa, the expensive Italian sofa she had bragged about. She buried her face in her hands. The guests were gone. The house was empty. She was alone in a mansion that had just become a prison. I started my car. The engine hummed to life. I felt a sense of deep, profound satisfaction. It wasn't happiness. Happiness is warm. This was cold. It was the satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing out to zero. I drove away, leaving her to make the call to Bradley. I imagined that conversation. I imagined Bradley hungover and useless, hearing that his empire of cards had just been blown over by a single breath from the brother he thought was nothing. The eviction was just the beginning. The real pain was yet to come. Most people, when faced with a $3 million debt, would freeze. They would call a bankruptcy attorney. They would start packing boxes. They would look for a small apartment to rent. But my brother Bradley is not most people. He suffers from a terminal case of entitlement. When Lydia called him screaming about the foreclosure notice, he did not rush home to comfort her. He rushed home to scream at the piece of paper. From my vantage point down the street, I watched his Porsche skid into the driveway. He slammed the car door so hard, the vehicle rocked on its suspension. He stormed into the house, leaving the front door wide open, letting the heat escape into the winter afternoon. I could hear his voice even through the double-paned glass of my car window. He was yelling about scams. He was yelling about fraud. He was yelling that nobody takes a house from Bradley Richter. He spent the next hour making phone calls. I knew exactly who he was calling because I had access to his call logs through the family plan he had forgotten to remove me from years ago. He wasn't calling the bank to negotiate. He wasn't calling a financial advisor. He was calling Henderson. Henderson was the lawyer who had botched the will reading. He was a man who specialized in slip-and-fall cases and drunk driving defenses, not complex estate litigation. But he was cheap, and he told Bradley what he wanted to hear. The next morning, I received an alert from the Cook County Clerk of Courts. A lawsuit had been filed. Bradley Richter versus Aurora Holdings, LLC. I opened the document on my iPad and almost laughed aloud. It was a masterpiece of incompetence. Bradley and Henderson were suing for harassment, emotional distress, and attempted fraud. Their argument was that Aurora Holdings was a shell company with no physical office, and therefore the debt was invalid. They claimed that the signature on the original reverse mortgage was forged, despite the fact that I had video evidence of my mother signing it with a notary present. They were trying to bluff a mathematical equation. They thought that if they made enough noise, the debt would just go away. Bradley truly believed he was winning. He walked out of Henderson's strip mall office that afternoon with a swagger I hadn't seen since high school. He told Lydia loudly enough for the receptionist to hear that he had handled it. He told her that Aurora Holdings would be begging for mercy by the end of the week. He told her they were going to countersue for millions. And then he did the most Bradley thing imaginable. To celebrate his imaginary legal victory, he went shopping. I followed him. I kept a safe distance 3 cars back. He drove to the Magnificent Mile, the most expensive shopping district in Chicago. He valet parked his car in front of a high-end jewelry store. I parked across the street and watched. Through the glass storefront, I saw him pointing at the display case. He wasn't looking at the price tags. He was looking at the shine. He tried on a gold watch, a Rolex day date. It was heavy, ostentatious, and completely unnecessary. I watched him pull out his credit card. It was a platinum card linked to the estate account, the same account that was currently frozen by my lien, though the bank's system likely hadn't updated the terminal status yet. It was a gamble. The clerk ran the card. I saw Bradley tapping his fingers on the glass counter, impatient, arrogant. The clerk frowned. The card was declined. Bradley didn't shrink in shame. He exploded. He waved his arms. He pointed at his suit. He shouted that he was the owner of the Richter estate. He pulled out another card. This one was Lydia's emergency card. He tried again. This time it went through. He walked out of the store with a $20,000 watch on his wrist. A watch he bought to prove to himself that he was still rich, using money that he would eventually have to pay back to credit card companies that are far less forgiving than I am. He drove home checking his wrist in the rearview mirror every 30 seconds. He was soothing his anxiety with retail therapy. He was behaving like an ostrich, burying his head in the sand, but instead of sand, it was luxury goods. That night he posted another picture on social media. It was a close-up of the watch with the steering wheel of his Porsche in the background. The caption read, "Invest in yourself. Haters will say it's luck. I say it's leverage." I sat in my dark office, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. Leverage. He used that word, but he didn't know what it meant. Leverage is using debt to create value. He was using debt to create an illusion. He didn't know that Henderson, his lawyer, had just realized who the registered agent for Aurora Holdings was. I had received a frantic voicemail from Henderson's office 5 minutes ago. The lawyer had looked up the corporate filing in Delaware and seen the name on the incorporation papers. He realized he wasn't suing a faceless corporation. He was suing the brother of his client. A brother who happened to be a forensic auditor with a perfect record. Henderson was trying to drop the case, but it was too late. The filing fee was paid. The court date was set. Bradley thought he had bought himself time. In reality, he had just expedited the process. By filing a lawsuit claiming fraud, he had opened himself up to the discovery phase. That meant I could legally demand to see every financial record, every email, and every text message he had sent since my mother died. He had just handed me the keys to his entire life. I looked at the photo of the watch one last time. It was a beautiful timepiece. It would look excellent on the auction block when the sheriff seized his personal assets to pay the deficiency judgment. I poured myself a glass of water. I didn't need wine. The taste of his impending reality check was sweet enough. The court date was in 2 weeks. He would walk in wearing that watch thinking he was the plaintiff. He would walk out knowing he was the defendant in the trial of his life. The Cook County Courthouse is a building designed to intimidate. It is a monolith of gray stone and glass, a place where fortunes are decided and lives are dismantled in quiet, carpeted rooms. The air inside always smells the same, a mixture of floor wax, stale coffee, and quiet desperation. I arrived at 8:45 in the morning. I wore my best charcoal suit, the one I used to wear when I testified in federal fraud cases. I did not sit in the gallery. I walked through the swinging wooden gate and took my seat at the defense table next to Leonard. When Bradley walked in, he stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was a shade too bright, and on his wrist, the gold Rolex he had bought with a credit card flashed under the fluorescent lights. He looked at me, then at Leonard, then back at me. I could see the confusion working its way through his mind. Why was his brother sitting at the defense table for Aurora Holdings? He whispered something to Henderson, his lawyer. Henderson shrugged. They likely assumed I was there as an intervener, or perhaps they thought I was just trying to intimidate them. They had no idea I was the client. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Burns, entered the room. She was a woman known for her impatience with frivolous lawsuits and her hatred of wasted time. She sat down, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the docket. Richter versus Aurora Holdings, she announced. Counsel, state your appearances. Henderson stood up. He adjusted his tie, trying to look important. Thomas Henderson for the plaintiff, Mr. Bradley Richter. Leonard stood up slowly. He didn't adjust anything. He didn't need to. Leonard Gold for the defense, Aurora Holdings, LLC. Henderson launched into his opening statement immediately. He was performing. He paced back and forth, gesturing wildly at Bradley, who was doing his best to look like a grieving, victimized son. Your Honor, Henderson boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. We are here today to right a terrible wrong. My client, a mourning son, has been targeted by a predatory entity known as Aurora Holdings. This faceless company operating from the shadows claims to hold a debt against the estate of the late Eleanor Richter. But we contend that this debt is fraudulent. We contend that the original loan documents were obtained through coercion, manipulation, and the exploitation of an elderly woman suffering from dementia. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I watched Bradley. He was nodding along, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. He actually believed his own narrative. He believed that if he said it loud enough, it would become true. Henderson continued, pointing an accusatory finger at our table. They preyed on her confusion. They forced a helpless old woman to sign away her equity, and now they seek to steal the family home from her rightful heir. It is elder abuse, Your Honor. It is sick, and we demand that the debt be declared void and that Aurora Holdings pay punitive damages for emotional distress. He sat down, looking triumphant. Bradley patted him on the back. Judge Burns turned her gaze to our table. Mr. Gold. Do you have a response? Leonard did not stand up immediately. He took a sip of water. He opened a file folder. Then he rose. Your Honor. Leonard said, his voice low and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. Mr. Henderson tells a very compelling story. It is a story of a villain and a victim. And we agree with him on one point. There was indeed coercion. There was indeed manipulation. And there was certainly elder abuse involved in the creation of the original debt. Bradley looked confused. Henderson frowned. They hadn't expected us to agree. However, Leonard continued, the cast of characters is incorrect. Aurora Holdings did not originate this debt, Your Honor. Aurora Holdings acquired this debt to prevent a foreclosure 3 years ago. The original lender was a company called Quick Cash Mortgages, and the person who facilitated that loan, the person who drove Eleanor Richter to the bank, and the person who coerced her into signing, was not an agent of Aurora Holdings. Leonard paused for effect. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the plaintiff. Mr. Bradley Richter. Objection. Henderson jumped up. This is slander. My client was trying to help his mother. Leonard ignored him. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce Exhibit A. It is a video recording dated November 12th, 3 years ago. It was recorded by a security camera installed in the kitchen of the Richter residence. I saw Bradley's face drain of color. He remembered the camera. I had installed it ostensibly to watch the caregivers, but he knew it was there. He just didn't know I had kept the backups. Judge Burns nodded. Proceed. Leonard tapped a key on his laptop, and the large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The image was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed my mother's kitchen. She was sitting at the table, her head in her hands, sobbing. She looked small and frail. Standing over her was Bradley. He wasn't the grieving son in the Navy suit. He was red-faced, angry, and aggressive. On the screen, Bradley slammed his hand on the table. Sign the damn papers, Mom, he yelled. The audio boomed through the courtroom speakers. I need the money by Friday. Do you want me to go to jail? Is that what you want? I don't understand. Mom's voice trembled. You said you would pay it back last time. I will pay it back, Bradley screamed, grabbing her shoulder and shaking her. Stop being so selfish. It is just a signature. Sign it, or I am walking out that door, and you will never see me again. In the video, my mother picked up the pen with a shaking hand. She was weeping. She signed the paper. Bradley snatched it away, checked the signature, and then smiled a cruel, predatory smile. Good, he said on the screen. See? Was that so hard? The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was different now. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of disgust. I looked at Bradley. He was staring at the table, unable to lift his head. Henderson was shuffling papers, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Leonard spoke again. Your Honor, Aurora Holdings purchased this debt to stop the foreclosure that resulted from Mr. Richter's failure to pay the loan he forced his mother to take. We have the bank records showing the funds from this loan were deposited directly into Mr. Richter's personal account, not his mother's. We have the records showing he spent it on travel gambling and luxury goods. Leonard turned to look directly at Bradley. The plaintiff claims fraud. He is correct, but he is the fraudster. He claims elder abuse. He is correct, but he is the abuser. Aurora Holdings is simply the entity holding the bill that he ran up. Judge Burns slowly took off her glasses. She looked at Bradley with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice like ice. Do you have any evidence to refute the video we just watched? Henderson stood up, but his knees were weak. Your Honor, I was not aware of this footage. I need a recess to confer with my client. Request denied. Judge Burns snapped. This is a frivolous lawsuit filed in bad faith. You have wasted the court's time, and you have insulted the memory of the deceased. She turned to me. I had remained silent the entire time. I was just the man in the charcoal suit, the witness to the truth. Mr. Gold, the judge said, does your client wish to move for immediate dismissal? We do, Your Honor, Leonard said. And we also move for summary judgment on the foreclosure. The plaintiff has admitted in his own filing that the debt exists. He simply tried to argue its validity. Since we have proven the validity and his own complicity in its creation, there is no factual dispute remaining. Judge Burns nodded. She picked up her gavel. It looked heavy. Case dismissed with prejudice, she ruled. Judgment is entered in favor of Aurora Holdings. The foreclosure may proceed immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiff to pay the legal fees of the defense. She slammed the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Bradley flinched. I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply buttoned my jacket. Bradley looked up at me, his eyes red and watery. Doug, he whispered. Doug, please. I looked at him. I looked at the watch on his wrist. You have 24 hours, Bradley, I said. And don't forget to leave the keys. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving him sitting alone at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of his own lies. The air in the hallway tasted different now. It didn't smell like desperation anymore. It smelled like justice. Rats are fascinating creatures. Biologists say they are social animals capable of empathy and cooperation. But put them in a cage, cut off the food supply, and introduce a predator, and that social bond evaporates instantly. They do not band together to fight the threat. They turn on each other. They cannibalize their own kind to survive another hour. I walked out of the courtroom and took the elevator down to the parking garage, knowing that I was about to witness this phenomenon in human form. The parking garage beneath the Cook County Courthouse is a dismal place. It is a cavern of gray concrete smelling of exhaust fumes and cold dampness. The fluorescent lights buzz with an irritating hum, casting long, sickly shadows. It is the perfect stage for the final act of a tragedy. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I did not start the engine. I simply lowered the window an inch. I knew where they were parked. Bradley had parked his Porsche in a reserved spot near the elevator, a spot he hadn't paid for naturally. A few minutes later, the elevator doors slid open. Bradley and Lydia emerged. The dynamic between them had shifted entirely. On the way in, they had been a united front, walking arm in arm, ready to crush the enemy. Now they were walking 3 feet apart. Bradley looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. His shoulders were slumped, his tie was crooked, and he was muttering to himself. Lydia, however, was walking fast. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete. She was clutching her Hermes bag, the one bought with my mother's retirement fund, tightly against her chest. She wasn't looking at Bradley. She was looking at her phone. Bradley reached the car and fumbled for his keys. He dropped them. The sound of the key fob hitting the concrete echoed loudly. "Damn it," he cursed. He bent down to pick them up. "Lydia, get in the car. We need to go to the bank. We need to figure this out." Lydia didn't move toward the passenger door. She stopped in the middle of the lane. "I am not going to the bank with you, Bradley," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the fake sweetness she used to display. Bradley looked up, confused. "What? What are you talking about? We have to move the money. If Doug freezes the accounts, there is no money to move." Lydia interrupted. Bradley froze. He stood up slowly, the keys dangling from his finger. "What did you say I said?" "There is no money," she repeated. "I transferred the remaining cash from the joint savings and the checking account while you were listening to that judge lecture you. It is gone, Bradley." I watched from my car, feeling a cold appreciation for her efficiency. She was a survivor. A parasite, yes, but a smart one. She had realized the ship was sinking before the captain did. Bradley's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "You stole it! You stole our money!" "It is not stealing," she snapped. "It is severance pay. I gave you 3 years of my life. I put up with your mother's complaining. I put up with your delusions of grandeur. I put up with your snoring and your incompetence. I earned every penny of that $40,000. $40,000, Bradley screamed. That was for the legal fees. That was for the mortgage. "Give it back, no," she said, taking a step back. "I need a fresh start. And you are a sinking stone. I am not going to let you drag me down to the bottom with you." Bradley lunged at her. It was a pathetic, clumsy move. He grabbed the strap of her handbag. "Give me the bag, Lydia." She shrieked and yanked it back. Her fingernails, long and manicured, raked across his face, leaving 3 bright red scratches on his cheek. "Get off me," she yelled. "You loser, you promised me a mansion. You promised me millions. And what do I get? A foreclosure notice and a husband who gets outsmarted by his boring brother." I leaned back in my seat. This was the truth finally coming out. All the "I love yous," all the public displays of affection, all the united front against the world, it was all a transaction. And the transaction had just defaulted. Bradley let go of the bag, touching his bleeding cheek. He looked at the blood on his fingers, stunned. "Lydia, please," he stammered, his voice breaking. "We can fix this. I can talk to Doug. I can—" "You can do nothing," she spat. "You are weak, Bradley. You have always been weak. Your mother knew it. Your brother knew it. And I knew it. I just thought you were rich enough to make up for it. I was wrong." A black SUV pulled up beside them. It was an Uber. Lydia had called it while sitting in the courtroom. She opened the door. "Wait," Bradley pleaded. "Where are you going to the airport?" she said. "I am going to stay with my sister in Miami. Do not call me. Do not come looking for me. If you do, I will tell the IRS about the tax evasion scheme you set up last year." She got into the car. She didn't look back. She slammed the door, and the SUV sped away, its taillights leaving red streaks in the gloom of the garage. Bradley stood there alone. He was bleeding. he was broke. His wife had just left him for a rideshare service. And standing there in the silence of the parking garage, the reality of his choices finally hit him. He had sacrificed his relationship with his mother for money. He had sacrificed his relationship with his brother for money. And now the woman he did it all for had left him because he had no money. He looked around wildly, as if looking for an audience, for someone to validate his pain. But there was no one. Just the concrete pillars and the parked cars. I watched him drop to his knees. He didn't cry out. He just slumped against the side of his Porsche, the car he could no longer afford to put gas in. He put his head in his hands. I started my engine. The sound startled him. He looked up. He saw my black sedan. He couldn't see me through the tinted windows, but he knew. He knew I was there. I put the car in gear and drove slowly past him. I didn't stop. I didn't roll down the window to offer a pithy remark. I didn't need to. His reflection in the side of my polished car as I passed was the only statement necessary. He was a man who had tried to buy a life he didn't earn, and now the bill had come due. The alliance of greed had collapsed as it always does, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. I drove up the ramp and into the daylight. The sun was shining now. It was a good day. The sound of a gavel striking mahogany is distinct. It is dry, sharp, and final. It is the sound of a door slamming shut on a life you thought you were going to live. When Judge Burns returned to the bench after the recess, she did not look at Bradley with anger anymore. She looked at him with the clinical detachment of a surgeon about to amputate a gangrenous limb. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. I sat with my hands clasped, my breathing steady. Beside me, Leonard was already packing his briefcase. He knew the outcome. He knew the law. Bradley, however, was gripping the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard his knuckles were white. He was praying for a miracle. He was praying for mercy. But the law is not a church. The law is a calculator, and his numbers did not add up. The court finds in favor of the defendant Aurora Holdings LLC on all counts, the judge began. Her voice was calm, but every word was a hammer blow. The plaintiff's claim of fraud is dismissed with prejudice. The video evidence presented clearly demonstrates that the plaintiff was the architect of his own financial distress, not the victim of it. Bradley let out a small strangled sound. It was the sound of a balloon losing its air. But the judge was not finished. She picked up a second document. Regarding the countersuit for foreclosure, she continued, "The court grants Aurora Holdings immediate possession of the property at 442 Oak Lane. The deed is hereby transferred to the lien holder effective immediately. The sheriff's department is authorized to execute a writ of eviction within 24 hours. I watched Bradley's shoulders collapse. He had lost the house. He thought that was the worst of it. He thought he was walking away with nothing, back to square one. He was wrong. He wasn't going back to zero. He was going into the abyss. Judge Burns adjusted her glasses and looked directly at him. "Mr. Richter, because you filed this lawsuit in bad faith, and because you have engaged in what the court determines to be the waste of collateral by destroying the property's landscaping and interior value, I am granting the defense's motion for a deficiency judgment." Bradley looked at his lawyer, Henderson. "What does that mean?" he whispered loudly. Henderson didn't answer. He couldn't look his client in the eye. "It means, Mr. Richter," the judge explained, "that taking the house is not enough to satisfy the debt you owe. The house in its current damaged state is valued at approximately $2 million. The debt you inherited and personally guaranteed, including the accrued interest penalties and the legal fees for this trial, totals $3.4 million. She paused to let the math sink in. "You are surrendering the house," she said, "and you are also ordered to pay the remaining balance of $1.4 million to Aurora Holdings. This judgment is effective immediately and will garner interest at the statutory rate of 9% per annum until paid in full." $1.4 million. Bradley stood up. He looked like he had been shot. "No," he stammered. "No, that's not possible. I don't have that kind of money. I have nothing." "That is a matter for bankruptcy court, Mr. Richter," the judge said coldly. "But I must warn you, debts incurred through fraud or malicious damage to property are often non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. You will likely carry this debt for the rest of your life." Case closed. The gavel came down one last time. Crack. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. It was the sound of a life ending. Not a physical death, but a financial execution. Bradley Richter, the man who wanted to be a king, was now a pauper with a 7-figure chain around his neck. I stood up and smoothed the front of my jacket. I turned to Leonard. "Good work, Leonard. Send the bill to my office." I walked toward the exit. I had to pass Bradley to get to the door. He was standing there, frozen, staring at the empty judge's bench. He looked like a ghost. When I stepped into his line of sight, his eyes focused on me. They were filled with a mixture of hatred and terror. "Doug," he rasped, "you can't do this. You can't leave me with $1 million in debt." "I'm your brother." I stopped. I didn't step closer. I maintained a professional distance. "You sued me, Bradley," I said softly. "You dragged me into this court. You tried to paint me as a villain for saving our mother's home. You wanted a legal battle. You got one." "But I will be ruined," he cried. "They will garnish my wages. They will take my car. They will take everything." "Yes," I said. "They will. That is how accountability works. You spent 40 years taking things you didn't earn. Now you are going to spend the rest of your life paying for things you destroyed." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card. It wasn't my personal card. It was the card for the Sheriff's Department eviction unit. "You have 24 hours, I said. "I suggest you start packing. And Bradley, don't take the copper wiring out of the walls. I will be inspecting the property tomorrow at noon. If a single light bulb is missing, I will add it to your tab." I walked past him. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cooler out here. It felt clean. I checked my watch. It was just past 11. I had a lunch reservation at a quiet steakhouse downtown. I was going to order a bottle of wine. I would decant it properly. I would let it breathe. And I would drink a toast to the one thing my brother never understood. The truth is the only currency that never devalues. The wind off Lake Michigan does not bargain. It does not listen to excuses, and it certainly does not care if you are having the worst day of your life. On the morning of the eviction, Chicago was buried under 6 inches of fresh snow, and the temperature had dropped to 10 degrees. It was the kind of cold that hurts your lungs when you inhale. It was the kind of cold that kills anything left unprotected. I sat in my car with the heater running, watching the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 11:59. The deadline set by Judge Burns was noon. Inside the house at 442 Oak Lane, my brother Bradley was likely pacing the floor frantically, calling friends who were no longer answering his calls. He was probably staring at the walls, unable to comprehend that the physical structure around him was no longer his shield against the world. At exactly 12 o'clock, a Cook County Sheriff's vehicle turned onto the street. It moved slowly, its tires crunching on the packed snow. It did not use sirens. Evictions are a civil matter, a bureaucratic process of unmaking a home. The car pulled into the driveway, blocking the exit for Bradley's Porsche. 2 deputies stepped out. They were large men dressed in thick parkas, their breath steaming in the air. They walked to the front door with the casual efficiency of men who do this 5 times a day. They knocked. It was a heavy, authoritative sound. I watched through the windshield. There was a pause. Then the door opened a crack. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I knew the script. They were asking for the occupant. They were showing the court order. They were giving him 10 minutes to gather his essentials and vacate the premises. The door closed. The deputies waited on the porch, stomping their boots to stay warm. 5 minutes is not a long time. It is enough time to grab a coat, a wallet, and perhaps a photograph. It is not enough time to pack a life. But Bradley didn't have a life to pack anymore. Lydia had taken the cash and the jewelry. The furniture belonged to the estate. All he had left were his clothes and his delusions. When the door opened again, the sight was pathetic. Bradley stumbled out. He was not wearing a winter coat. He was wearing the navy suit jacket from the trial, a garment meant for a climate-controlled courtroom, not a Chicago blizzard. In his hands, he dragged 2 black plastic garbage bags. They were hefty bags, the kind you use for leaves or kitchen trash. That was his luggage. His Italian silk shirts, his designer jeans, the remnants of his wardrobe were stuffed inside black plastic sacks. He looked like a refugee from his own arrogance. One of the deputies said something to him and pointed toward the street. Bradley argued for a second. He pointed back at the house. He pointed at his car. The deputy shook his head and pointed again to the curb. The Porsche was staying. It was an asset of the estate, and since he couldn't pay the deficiency judgment, it was now collateral. Bradley slumped. He dragged the bags down the driveway, slipping on the ice. He fell once, landing hard on his knees. He stayed there for a moment, the snow soaking into his expensive trousers. No one helped him. The deputies watched him with indifferent eyes. They had seen worse. But the deputies were not the only audience. Across the street, Mrs. Higgins had stepped out onto her porch. She was wrapped in a thick wool coat, holding a steaming mug of coffee. Next to her was Mr. Henderson, not the lawyer, but the retired plumber from down the block, whom Bradley had once called a peasant, because his truck was parked on the street. They didn't jeer. They didn't throw snowballs. They just watched. Their silence was heavier than the snow. They were the neighborhood witnesses, the people Bradley had sneered at for years, while living in a house his mother paid for. Now they were warm, and he was out in the cold. Bradley reached the sidewalk. He dropped the bags. He wrapped his arms around himself, shivering violently. He looked back at the house. The deputies were locking the front door. I saw the flash of a padlock being snapped onto the handle, a lockbox for the realtor. The sound of that lock clicking shut must have been deafening to him. It was the sound of finality. He stood there, a small, shivering figure, against the backdrop of the massive house he had tried to steal. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on his shoulders, turning his dark hair white. He looked like a statue of regret abandoned in a park. He pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. I knew what he was seeing. No new messages. No missed calls. Lydia was likely halfway to Miami by now. His friends were at work earning the money he thought was beneath him. He had nowhere to go. Mrs. Higgins took a sip of her coffee, shook her head, and went back inside her warm house. One by one, the neighbors retreated from their windows. The show was over. The king had been dethroned, and he turned out to be nothing more than a jester in a stolen crown. Bradley stood alone on the curb. He looked up and down the empty street. And then his eyes locked on my car. I had been waiting for this moment. I put my hand on the door handle. It was time to deliver the final message. It was time to close the book. The engine of my Bentley was the only warm sound in the frozen silence of Oak Lane. I watched my brother through the windshield. He was shaking so violently that the movement was visible from 20 feet away. The snow was beginning to pile up on the shoulders of his thin suit jacket, turning him into a snowman made of misery and regret. When he saw me, his eyes did not light up with recognition. They lit up with the desperate feral hope of a drowning man spotting a piece of driftwood. I put the car in park. I took a moment to adjust my cuffs. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I did not look like a man who had just won a lawsuit. I looked like a man who was about to conduct a business transaction. I opened the door and stepped out into the biting wind. The cold hit me instantly, but I was wearing a cashmere coat and leather gloves. I was prepared for the elements. Bradley was not. He scrambled toward me. He slipped on a patch of ice, went down on one knee, and clawed his way back up. He didn't care about dignity anymore. He ran the last few feet and practically collided with me. "Doug," he gasped. His teeth were chattering so loud it sounded like dice rattling in a cup. "Doug, thank God. Thank God you are here." He reached out to grab my arm, but I took a small, precise step back. His hands grasped at empty air. "You have to help me," he stammered, his lips turning a dangerous shade of blue. "They kicked me out. They changed the locks. Lydia took everything." "I have nothing, Doug. No money, no phone charger. Just these bags." I looked at the black garbage bags sitting in the snow. They looked like roadkill. "I need a place to stay," he continued, the words tumbling out over each other. "Just for a few days. Just until I sort this out. I can sleep on your couch. I won't be a bother. Please, Doug. I am freezing to death out here. We are brothers. You can't leave your brother on the street." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I searched for the arrogance he had displayed at the funeral. I searched for the smugness he had worn in the courtroom. It was all gone. Stripped away by the wind and the truth. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. Bradley's eyes followed my hand. He probably thought I was reaching for my wallet. He probably thought I was going to pull out a stack of cash and save him, just like our mother used to do every time he made a mistake. But I didn't pull out a wallet. I pulled out a small rectangular card case made of silver. I opened it and extracted a single heavy card. Cream-colored stock, raised black lettering. I held it out to him. "What is this?" he asked, his hands shaking too hard to take it. "Take it," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind. He took the card. He squinted at it, his eyes watering from the cold. He read the name. Then he read the title. Then he read the company name. Douglas Richter, Chairman and CEO, Aurora Holdings, LLC. He looked up at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit him harder than the cold. He wasn't talking to his estranged brother. He was talking to the entity that had just evicted him. "You," he whispered. "You are the chairman." I nodded once. "I am not here as your brother Bradley. I am here as the owner of this property. I am here to conduct the final walkthrough and secure the asset." "But," "Why?" he asked. Tears began to spill over his frozen lashes. "Why did you do this? Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you let me humiliate myself in court?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," I said. "You never listened. You thought you were smarter than everyone else. You thought you could charm your way out of debt and bully your way into wealth. You needed to see the wall before you hit it." He dropped the card into the snow. He looked at the house he had grown up in, the house he had tried to turn into a party palace. "Mom wanted me to have this house," he cried. "It was in the will. Mom wanted you to have a home," I corrected him. "But she also wanted peace." "Do you know why I bought her debt, Bradley? Do you know why I created Aurora Holdings?" He shook his head, shivering. "I did it because she was afraid of you," I said. The words hung in the air. Bradley recoiled as if I had slapped him. "She wasn't afraid of me," he protested weakly. "She loved me. She loved you, yes, but she was terrified of your greed. She called me 3 years ago crying because you were screaming at her about the reverse mortgage. She told me she felt like a prisoner in her own kitchen. She told me she couldn't sleep because she was afraid you would come over and demand more money." I took a step closer to him. I loomed over him. "You inherited her assets, Bradley. You got the house. You got the stocks. You got everything she had on paper. But I bought the one thing that actually mattered. I paused. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to remember this for the rest of his life. I bought her peace. I took on the debt so she could die thinking her son was a success, not a thief. I paid for her tranquility with my own money, and now I am collecting the return on my investment. Bradley stared at me. He looked broken. He looked small. "So what happens to me?" he whispered. I looked down the street. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. "That is up to you," I said. "You have a law degree you never used. You have 2 hands. I suggest you start using them." I walked past him. I walked up the driveway, my shoes leaving deep, firm prints in the snow. I reached the front door. I pulled a master key from my pocket. It slid into the lock smoothly. I turned the key. The mechanism clicked. It was a satisfying, heavy sound. I opened the door. The warmth from inside rushed out to meet me. It smelled of sawdust and old memories. I stepped across the threshold. "Doug!" Bradley screamed from the curb. "Doug, please don't close the door." I turned back. I looked at him one last time. He was a dark smudge against the white world. "Goodbye, Bradley." I closed the door. I locked it from the inside. The sound of his screaming was cut off instantly. I was alone in the silence of the house. I took a deep breath. The air was still. The chaos was gone. The rot had been removed. I walked into the living room. I picked up a piece of debris from the floor, a shard of the vase he had broken during his party. I placed it in the trash bin. Then I took out my phone and dialed Hannah. It was time to bring the real family home. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in a parked car outside a diner on the south side of the city. It was not the kind of place my brother used to frequent. The neon sign buzzed with a dying electrical hum, and the windows were coated in a layer of grease that never quite came off. I was not there to eat. I was there to check on my investment, or rather, the liquidation of my bad asset. Bradley emerged from the back door at 11 at night. He looked 20 years older. The navy suit was gone, replaced by a stained gray uniform that hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. Stress does that to a man when he realizes the world does not owe him a living. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. It was a cheap brand. He used to smoke imported cigars to impress his friends. Now he smoked to suppress his appetite because dinner was a luxury he could not always afford. Every Friday, 25% of his paycheck is automatically deducted and transferred to Aurora Holdings. It is not a lot of money. At his current wage as a dishwasher, it barely covers the interest on the interest. But it is not about the amount. It is about the reminder. Every time he looks at his pay stub, he sees my company name. He sees the consequence of his greed printed in black and white. He is paying for his arrogance one dirty plate at a time. He is alone now in every sense of the word. Lydia did not just leave him. She erased him. My private investigator sent me a photo from Miami last week. It showed Lydia on the deck of a yacht holding a cocktail, her arm draped around a silver-haired real estate developer who looked suspiciously like the man Bradley wanted to be. She looked happy. She looked like a predator who had found a new host. She never called Bradley. She never sent a card. She simply molted her old life and slithered away, leaving him to pay the bill for their shared delusions. Bradley finished his cigarette and flicked the butt into a puddle of dirty slush. He pulled his collar up against the wind. He did not walk toward a Porsche. He walked toward the bus stop. He lives in a boarding house 2 miles away, in a room that smells of boiled cabbage and despair. It is a far cry from the master suite at Oak Lane, but it is what he can afford. I watched him board the bus. He sat near the window, resting his forehead against the cold glass. He looked tired. He looked broken. But for the first time in his life, he was earning his keep. He was no longer a parasite. He was a man facing the brutal, honest arithmetic of survival. I did not feel pity. I felt the quiet satisfaction of a chaotic equation finally resolving into balance. He was exactly where he belonged. Spring came to Chicago late that year, but when it arrived, it washed away the gray slush of winter and revealed the scars that needed healing. I spent the last 3 months pouring capital into 442 Oak Lane. It was not an expense. It was a restoration of dignity. The crater in the backyard where Bradley had tried to dig his infinity pool was filled in with fresh, dark soil. I hired a landscape architect to recreate my mother's rose garden using the original blueprints I found in her desk. The library was restocked. I spent weeks scouring antique shops and online auctions to replace the first editions Bradley had thrown in the dumpster. When I walked into the house now, it did not smell of construction or decay. It smelled of lemon oil and old paper. It smelled like home again. On a bright Tuesday morning, I asked Hannah to meet me there. She arrived in a small, sensible sedan she had bought with her own money from working part-time at the university library. She walked up the driveway, looking at the restored facade with wide eyes. She was wearing a simple wool coat and holding her textbooks against her chest. She looked like the student she was meant to be, not the servant her parents had tried to force her to become. I met her on the porch. I did not say a word. I simply held out my hand. Sitting in my palm was a heavy brass key. It was not the electronic key card Bradley had installed. It was the original key to the oak front door, the one my father had carried for 40 years. "Uncle Doug," she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is this?" "It is the master key," I said softly. She looked at me confused. "But you own the house. You bought the debt." "I did," I replied. "But a house is just wood and stone, Hannah. It needs a soul to be a home. I am an old man. I live in my spreadsheets and my silence. This house was built for a family. It was built for a future." I took her hand and pressed the key into her palm. "Inside on the kitchen table there is a deed," I explained. "It is held in a trust. The trust stipulates that you are the sole beneficiary. You own this house, Hannah. It is yours to live in, yours to study in, yours to grow in." Tears began to spill down her cheeks. She shook her head. "I can't accept this. It is worth millions. Why would you do this?" I looked her in the eye. "Because you are the only person in this family who still possesses a conscience," I said. "When the ship was sinking, you didn't try to loot the cargo. You tried to help. You have integrity, Hannah. And integrity is the only currency that matters to me." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "There is one condition in the trust. Your parents are not allowed on these premises without your express written permission. If you let them move back in, if you let them bring their toxicity back into these walls, the trust dissolves and the property goes to charity. Do you understand?" She nodded, gripping the key tightly. "I understand, Uncle Doug. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I said. I turned and walked down the steps. The sun was warm on my face. I walked to my Bentley and opened the door. Before I got in, I looked back. Hannah was unlocking the door. She pushed it open and stepped into the warmth of the foyer. The house seemed to welcome her. I sat in the driver's seat and started the engine. The powerful motor purred to life, a sound of refined engineering. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood proud and tall, the roses beginning to bud in the garden. The rot had been cut out. The parasite had been removed. The host was healing. For the first time in months, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. I reached over and turned on the radio. A jazz station was playing a Miles Davis track. It was the same song my father used to listen to on Sunday afternoons. I smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible to anyone outside the car, but it was genuine. The ledger was finally balanced. The audit was complete. And as I drove toward the city skyline, leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged, I knew that my mother was finally resting in peace. My name is Douglas Richter, and this case is closed. I learned that true inheritance is not found in bank accounts or property deeds, but in the values we carry. My brother believed he was entitled to a fortune, yet he inherited only the heavy cost of his own greed. I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is not enabling those who hurt us, but building a fortress of boundaries to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Integrity is a long-term investment that compounds over time, while arrogance is a debt that always comes due. By saving this house for Hannah, I proved that the future belongs to those who build, not those who destroy. Have you ever had to make a hard choice to protect your family's legacy from someone within your own circle? I want to hear your story in the comments below. If you found satisfaction in seeing justice served today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There is another story on your screen right now about a betrayal that led to an even bigger surprise. Click it, and I will see you there.